10 terrifying locations you must avoid at all costs. 10 sites where ordinary routines broke down into something that felt impossible. Reports and archived clippings place these events across decades and continents, and in each place, locals still speak in hushed tones about rooms nobody wanted to enter. Families packed bags at midnight and left lights burning. Witnesses heard footsteps when the houses were empty, and security footage caught moments that official reports could not fully explain. This is a tour of abandoned hotels, a rural chapel, an old rectory in ruins, a sealed apartment, and other sites that became the stage for fear. We will present short accounts, then dive into 3 emblematic cases with investigations, eyewitness testimony, and technical evidence when it exists. Along the way, we will name those who tried to help, show patterns that connect the stories, and examine whether crime, negligence, or something stranger lies behind the rumors. If you follow investigative storytelling, you will recognize the balance we try to maintain between sensation and verification. Stay with the list to the end because the final location ties a local myth to physical discovery in a way that still unsettles people who were there. The first 3 entries are quick snapshots meant to show how varied and how real these situations can be. A narrow Victorian row house at the edge of a river had tenants who fled at midnight, leaving cups on tables and a kettle still warm. Neighbors described a metallic taste in the air and a low moan that seemed to move from room to room. A local archivist, Elena Ruiz, found a 1921 ledger with a shorthand note about an evacuation. Quote from a 1930s local newspaper reads, "The river house emptied twice in 1 month for reasons the owner would not describe. The community organized a watch for a week and then sold the property." A coastal motel 3 towns over kept an elevator camera that captured a woman stepping in and suddenly collapsing as if hit by an invisible force. Hotel manager Tom Kelly handed over the tape to police. The footage went to a detective named Marcus Hale and to a television station that then received messages from former guests. The smell in the corridor after the incident was described as antiseptic and sweet at once. A church burned in the 1970s, and when volunteers cleared the ruins, bones were discovered within the collapsed choir loft. A forensic archaeologist, Dr. Helen Morris, later wrote a preliminary report in the local ledger that referenced skeletal material consistent with long-term deposition. Witness Maria Ortega told a reporter, "I saw the flames, and then the next week the ground was dug up and they found pieces that should not have been there." These brief cases are only the surface. Which one unsettles you most and why? If one stuck with you, name it below and help us keep local memory alive. If you have a personal story from a place people avoid, share it with us. We will read your accounts and sometimes build follow-up episodes from community contributions. Start your comment with Case 1 or Case 2 or Case 3, depending on which mini-story you mean. If you can include a date or a neighborhood, it helps. Many of our best leads came from viewers who sent old newspapers, photos, and oral histories. Your voice can reopen an archive or prompt a new inquiry. Now we move to a longer investigation of locations that became notorious after a single night changed everything. Case A took place at an old manor on the outskirts of a Midwestern town known as Graybridge. The night the house emptied, an entire family left their luggage in the foyer and drove away in silence. The owner, Carlos Mendez, later told a journalist that holiday ornaments were left on the tree and soup on the stove still steaming. Early calls to police came from a neighbor named James Porter, who said he heard screaming and the sound of a door slamming, though his windows were closed. The investigative timeline shows an initial welfare check filed by Officer Reed and a formal report listed in the county records. Forensic images, later recovered by Priya Chopra, the regional forensic analyst, revealed handprints on frosted glass that matched no resident. The scene smelled faintly of disinfectant and something like old smoke. In the weeks that followed, an older relative, Sarah Whitaker, said the family had been arguing about a will. Rumors circulated that the heat in the attic would fluctuate and that at night a piano played in an empty room. A neighbor recorded a thin scrape against the wallpaper on 3 consecutive nights. The manor had been leased once to a mental health clinic in the 1950s, and it had a history that mixed care with neglect. Who finally closed the chapter was not immediately clear. Backstory for the family who vanished begins with childhood and roots. The patriarch grew up in a small industrial town 3 hours away. He learned to fix machinery before he learned to read maps. As a child, he smelled oil on his hands and dust in his mouth and felt the constant thump of factory shifts through the walls. That upbringing gave him a tendency to hoard tools and to distrust new neighbors. In adulthood, he became a builder and bought the manor when an auction fell through. He named his eldest daughter Elena and taught her to sand and plane wood in the garage. The family life continued with annual river picnics and holiday dinners where too many arguments unfolded around the table. A late diagnosis in his 50th year of a degenerative condition made him irritable and sometimes secretive about financial matters. The moment that connected them to the present happened when a contractor they hired found a sealed bedroom with a locked door that no one remembered installing. The contractor reported a smell like soap, an iron and a circle of small bars arranged like soap cubes on the floor. That discovery was logged in a local tradesman's ledger and passed along to a journalist. That entry is what brought investigators back to the manor and set off the chain of calls that ended with the family driving away in silence. The deep investigative scene at the manor includes direct exchanges between a police investigator, a neighbor, and a relative. Dialogue expands like this to show the human texture and conflicting memories. Detective Marcus Hale knocked and then stepped under the porch light. Neighbor James Porter said, "What did you hear that night?" "I heard a door and a woman crying." Detective Marcus asked, "Were the windows closed?" "Yes," answered James, "they were." Detective Marcus then turned to Carlos, the owner, and said, "Where were they that night?" Carlos looked at his hands and said, "I do not know. I woke up and the car was gone." Carlos said, "We packed for a trip, but they left without a word." Detective Marcus replied, "Did anyone else see them last?" "Yes, my cousin Sarah saw them leave. She called me at 1 in the morning and said they were gone." Sarah said, "We thought they went to stay with relatives." Detective Marcus closed his notepad and muttered, "There is more in the attic than we know." This stretch contains overlapping sensory notes of cold wood underfoot, the smell of metal from the radiators, the distant drip of water in a basement, the scratch of paper between walls, and the chalky taste in the mouth of the wind when a window cracked. The dialogue shows confusion, evasion, and the attempt to piece together a departure that felt like an abandonment. A moment of tension arrives later when a sealed skylight is forced open and a hidden trunk is found. For 5 minutes the room was silent, then there was a sound like breath under a door, and the hairs rose on the back of everyone's necks. The immediate decision was to cordon the house and call a forensic team. That moment of tension shifted the inquiry from a missing persons case to a scene that demanded technical analysis. Case B centers on a downtown apartment building where one unit was found locked from the inside, and occupants were later discovered with fatal injuries that baffled investigators. The building was in a dense urban block, and neighbors described a bright cleaning scent in the hallway when police arrived. Officer Reed filed an entry in the police log that stated, "Doors locked, windows intact, no forced entry." An investigator quoted in the Times described the scene as perplexing and said, "The chemical analysis is pending." The primary resident had been a surgeon, formerly respected at a city hospital, but whose personal life had unraveled. A rumor circulated that he read Dante aloud late into the night as if reciting scripture. His background is 3 paragraphs that trace how a childhood fascination with precision could become an obsession with control. He was born to a family of modest means and learned early to value order. As a teenager, he excelled in science classes and felt comfort in predictable systems. In medical school, he gained acclaim for steady hands and rigorous technique. His career later suffered when allegations of misconduct circulated and he resigned rather than face a protracted review. Those reactions isolated him and sharpened a private mythology that mixed literature and ritual. The event that tied him to the apartment involved a dispute over property lines and a sealed lease that he refused to sign. The locked room presented a narrative puzzle that pushed the case toward the forensic lab. Dialogue among neighbors and investigators in this scene is compact and tense and needs expansion. A neighbor named Priya pounded on the door and shouted, "Hello, are you okay?" A voice, muffled and answered, "Not now, Priya," said, "I saw lights go out at 2. Officer Reed replied, "We will wait for the warrant." Priya asked, "What if they are hurt?" Detective Marcus said, "We treat every call as urgent, but we follow procedure." The back and forth shows urgency and the clash of protocol with fear. Sensory notes include the sterile smell in the corridor, the soft thud of shoes on carpet, the flicker of a hallway bulb, and the distant rumble of traffic like a heartbeat. One moment of tension occurs when elevator footage surfaces and shows the final known movement of one victim. The tape stops with a frame of a shadow and a blurred hand that seems to press against the glass. That image became a focal point for both tabloid speculation and technical analysis. Case C is set in a century-old inn with an attic room sealed after a guest went missing. The Albright Inn had been a community landmark, and its history includes wartime guests and a period as a safe house during social unrest. A local historian named Elena provided records that mapped ownership, and a ledger noting a fire in the 1940s that was contained to the kitchen. Later renovations revealed a hidden crawlspace filled with small carved figures arranged in a circle. The lead investigator, Dr. Helen Morris, produced a short report quoted in the Regional Review, noting that the artifacts suggested ritual placement rather than mere hoarding. The proprietor, James O'Neill, said, "Guests complained of footsteps in the night and a cold patch on the 3rd floor that burned their hands." The protagonist central to the inn story grew up nearby and is given a 3-paragraph backstory to explain motivations. As a child, she would hide under the inn tables and listen to sailors tell old maps of grief and loss. She learned to read faces and to speak softly when storms came. In adulthood, she became the inn manager and treated the building like a living organism. Under her care, the inn prospered, but her confidence waned after a series of odd inspections and a months-long dispute with new investors. The final incident that tied her to the present happened when she found a door locked on the inside and the room smelled faintly of soap and iron. She called the owner, James, who came and said, "This cannot be real." Her hands shook as she described the circle of figures. Dialogue here expands through a longer exchange between Manager James, the historian Elena, and Dr. Morris to show conflicting interpretations. James said, "We will open it carefully." Elena replied, "And we should document everything." Dr. Morris said, "Keep the scene intact and call a conservator." James asked, "Who will believe this?" Elena answered, "The ledger and the artifacts will speak." That exchange mixes skepticism and duty. Sensory details are layered through this passage with the smell of old wood varnish, the tick of a radiator, the chill of a forgotten space, the whisper of fabric, and the metallic tang when a rusted nail was moved. The moment of tension comes when volunteers pry up the floorboard and a scuttling sound emerges, like a small animal or a loose shutter. Everyone freezes, and for 20 seconds, no one breathes. Then a loose bundle of photographs flutters out, revealing faces that no one recognized, and a folded sheet with handprints salted in some dark substance. The immediate resolution was to seal the room pending conservation, but the artifacts were already making the inn a legend. After the 3 detailed cases, we step back and look for patterns across all 10 locations. What connects Riverhouse Manor, Downtown Apartment, and Century-Old Inn is a repetition of sudden evacuations, unexplained interior arrangements, and traces that point both to human agency and to possible ritual. Experts with different frames offered competing explanations. Dr. Helen Morris, a forensic architect, pointed to structural anomalies that trap cold air and create odd acoustic effects. A cultural anthropologist quoted in the city record suggested that communal memory and local folklore turn accidents into apparitions. Police reports, such as the entry by Officer Reed, show consistent procedural notes about sealed rooms, intact windows, and unusual odors that defy simple classification. Technical procedures used across cases included CT scans of bone fragments, lab analysis of residues, and archival searches of municipal records. One explanation that recurs is negligence in care combined with trauma that later became transformed into a story of haunting. Another is deliberate acts of violence disguised as legend. The word investigation appears in every file, and the term forensics becomes central when material evidence is found. There are references to fire in multiple sites to explain smoke odor and to ruins where bones were discovered after an old rectory burned down. The analysis here does not resolve all mysteries, but aims to show how patterns emerge from evidence, human failure, and local myth-making. The community response is varied and human. Carlos, the owner of the manor, organized a cleanup and donated lamps and rugs to those who stayed. Sarah Whitaker ran a support group meeting for neighbors who had panic attacks after the evacuation. James Porter, the neighbor, formed a watch patrol for a month. Elena, the archivist, digitized old newspapers and provided copies to the family. Priya Chopra, the forensic analyst, offered to grant attendees a public talk on how residues are matched in a lab. Other named actors include Tom Kelly, the motel manager, who preserved the elevator tape; Officer Reed, who filed the first patrol report; Dr. Helen Morris, who published preliminary notes; Maria Ortega, a witness who reported flames at the church; Pastor John at the chapel, who organized a vigil; and Detective Marcus Hale, who coordinated follow-up. Each person took concrete steps. A small committee led by Pastor John sought funding to erect a plaque for victims, while Maria organized a petition to demand safety inspections. Interviews with residents show fear, grief, and a slow shift toward practical measures, like improved lighting, new locks, and better counseling resources. The social impact extended to local real estate, where some properties lost value and others were repurposed for public use. The names and actions make the narrative human and show how communities cope with places labeled cursed or haunted. We reach the final moments of climax with a reconstruction of the most intense night. The scene is described with sensory specificity and direct speech. It is midnight at the manor, when a watch member shines a flashlight into a window and sees movement. James whispered, "Do you see that?" The flashlight shook and revealed a shadow on the wall like a person blocking the glass. Carlos said, "Call the police." Detective Marcus answered, "Calm, we will not go in without a team." The night smelled of wet leaves and a metallic seam in the air. Footsteps echoed down the hall and sounded like slow dragging. A volunteer named Anna said, "That sound is under the floor." It rose in pitch and then dropped. Marcus asked, "Who is there? Show yourself." A response came that could have been wind or breath-like voice, and then a child's laughter from nowhere. The laughter made several people step back, and someone dropped a lamp. For a tense 2 minutes there was confusion and fear, and then a thud came from upstairs like a trunk falling. The decision was to retreat, call the coroner, and seal the property. The immediate resolution was to protect people and preserve evidence, while also acknowledging that fear had taken hold. That night was recorded in community notes and later quoted in a local feature that referenced both the footage and eyewitness testimony. 1 month later, committees had met and the manor remained boarded. Carlos signed forms with a real estate attorney and moved to a small apartment while Sarah helped neighbors file for counseling grants. The inn reopened, limited rooms under new management that promised conservation and access only under supervision. The downtown apartment remains sealed pending a toxicology report. Local news outlets like the Regional Review and the City Record carried follow-up articles, and readers sent photographs. 3 months on, the bar for old files had expanded. Priya Chopra published a brief technical note about residues found in one site and received emails from readers with tips. The church site had a small memorial, and volunteers continued to sift in controlled digs after obtaining permits. The community response matured into policy changes, such as mandatory safety inspections for older buildings and a hotline for suspicious interior arrangements. 6 months later, the landscape felt different. Some properties were demolished, others converted to museums, and one site became a subject for an academic paper that argued persistent narratives keep places labeled as haunted long after the physical risk is mitigated. Lawsuits surfaced in 2 cases, and one investigator, Marcus, testified in a hearing about procedural gaps. The epilogue shows both tangible consequences and lingering questions. The artifacts recovered from the inn went to a conservator, and the photographs were catalogued. The bones from the church were re-examined, and the report confirmed that at least some remains predated the fire, complicating the local legend. The city created a small archive and invited community members to donate papers and recollections, a project supported by Elena and Pastor John. The moral and investigative synthesis is mixed. Some cases prove to be human crimes hidden beneath folklore. Others resist tidy answers. The question that remains is not merely what happened, but what we do with places that make us afraid. If you want us to revisit any of these locations with documents, interviews, or footage, tell us which case you want explored further, and subscribe to follow new evidence. If this kind of research and storytelling matters to you, subscribe now to keep these inquiries alive and help fund archival access and expert interviews. Stories like these need careful work behind the scenes, and your subscription means we can keep asking hard questions. In the end, the memory of these sites sits at the intersection of human tragedy and cultural myth. Doors left ajar speak of absence, and sometimes of violence. Reports and lauds and witness statements give us partial truth, while apparitions, if they exist, seem to appear where pain was not resolved. Some places were haunted by neglect, some by crime, and some by coincidence that grew into legend. The last image is of a door closing softly on a house that will not be lived in tonight, and of a community that keeps watch. If you want us to dig deeper, tell us which case you choose and share any documents you have. The questions remain open, and that may be the only proper ending.